No, you don't need the.
Legend. He a 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 legend. Welcome to the league. 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 Welcome to the league. To the league. To the league. To the league. To the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and I'm joined once again with J Skelts. We're going to talk more about the World's 2023 teams. We're going to focus on the LPL and the LCK today, and add them to the tier list that we made in the last video. So what we're going to do before the intros, I'll just explain the operation. We're going to start with the favorite Gen.G, and we're going to work our way down to Damwon through the odds, and just kind of hit on them pretty quick. Nothing too in depth, and we'll probably have other player take videos and stuff like that in the future. So J Scouts, what's up?
Not too much. Excited to talk about the teams that probably are going to be winning Worlds. But yeah, it should be fun.
Yes, and in regards to the wildcard teams, we're not talking about them yet. That'll be more like matchup specific and things like that. It'll be cool to see how Worlds plays out after the 9th, because I think that I'll have a lot more opinions about how different teams will fit into the meta, assuming that the first match shows us something about how teams are looking at things, because teams will scrim each other, and the popular champions, popular bans and stuff like that will be more well known, and that's part of the reason why I think I'm at a little bit less of a disadvantage in terms of not paying attention the past couple of months, because this patch will probably make a decent impact on what's happening in pro matches. So first up, we have Gen.G, 369, Kanavi, Knight, Ruler, and Missing. So what do you think here?
I think they're very clearly the strongest team at the Worlds. I think that's also reflected in their odds. But I mean, what can you say about them other than just totally dominant in spring, totally dominant at MSI, not quite as dominant in summer, but still extremely strong and good enough to win the LPL, which is almost always going to make you like the favorite, or at least the second favorite for the tournament. So just kind of, even I know, looking at every player in each role, like these guys are immensely talented. So
Yep.
Unsurprised to see how good they are and how the odds reflect that.
Yeah, so the odds are at plus 115 to 125, which is like roughly a 45% break-even point, or an implied win rate. We were talking a little before we started the video about what the odds would have to look like in the finals to justify betting this number. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough for me to think of any team in League of Legends being that likely to win Worlds. Just every team is really, really good, especially at the top end. So if you're just thinking from if they're best case scenario, they're guaranteed to go to the Swiss, and then they have average odds of 75% in the quarters, semis, and finals. That's when you get to around break even on plus 120, which seems very tough. They're obviously a very talented team, and they will be 75% in best of fives against some teams at Worlds, but just seems I can't get to plus 120 on any team. Not saying Gen.G is bad, but just saying it's very tough in League of Legends to be that big of a favorite against the best teams in the world.
Yeah, I would think maybe there's a way to hedge out of this number consistently throughout the tournament. Maybe that's why. Maybe if you have Gen.G as huge favorites in a lot of these spots during the Swiss part of the tournament, maybe there will be enough value there in the best of ones to justify it, because all it takes is one random loss from them or two random losses to get yourself out of this number. But yeah, probably not worth it for me. I was looking at one of Cajal's videos. He did a top 5 for every position, and I'm pretty sure he had 4 out of 5 players as the number 1 player in their role, and all 5 of them were a top 2 player in their role. And I understand that they are 5 of the best players in the world. I agree that they're 5 of the best players in the world, but they all function in very different roles. Personally, I think that Kanavi's the best player on the team. I think he's the most important player on the team. I do think that they're in a great spot to win, and we're dominant at MSI and everything. But that doesn't mean that they're the best player in each role in my mind. So that'll be a difference point that I have with other, people that are ranking the players individually. But I'll talk about that in different videos. One thing also to keep in mind is that 3 of these players are actually Korean. Or no, 3 of the players plus coaches are Korean. So that's going to be something to watch out for being in Korea. I do actually think it will be somewhat impactful because in the past we've seen that teams in their own regions outperform slightly, I think, especially thinking about Europe in Europe. Like they actually had a pretty good Worlds. And I don't want to play too much into that, but it might be a tiebreaker in some scenarios. But let's go to the next team, LNG. So LNG is plus 500 on 365. They're around 400 on Pinnacle. What do you think about LNG?
Yeah, I think they're another incredibly talented team. And just to take a step back and talk about other like content creators and professional players tier lists, I think it's important to like contextualize that information and kind of like if you're going to be betting on stuff, I wouldn't take their word as gospel. Like I think notoriously like professional athletes are some of the worst gamblers of all time. And so a lot of what goes into it, like I will never dispute their analysis of like these guys are the best players in their role, but I think understanding like what is the range of outcomes of these players, like they might not be giving them that, or like they might be approaching it from that angle. So a piece of the process, but I certainly wouldn't just be like, well, JDG has the best players, so like I'm gonna bet JDG type of thing. If you just like take a look at and see like how wide of a range you can apply to these guys, then maybe you'll get a better way of quantifying it. But on LNG, yeah, I think again they made a swap at AD carry, if I remember right. Like they swapped LP for Gala in summer. Not that they looked bad in spring, but they got I think 5th or maybe 6th in that spot, and then took JDG to 5 games in the LPL finals, which is obviously a bad team is never going to do that. So just in an incredibly strong team, I think you just look all over this roster, you can see guys that are like, yep, these guys are incredibly good. I think, probably even I know some of the memes about a guy like Hung, who's like famous for missing a thresh hook or something in a game, and people made fun of it. Like, very good player. Gala, I could not have been more wrong about that guy back when he was. I remember the Gala and Mark bot lane. I forget even what team that was, but a guy that I've been wrong about a lot. This team will be very strong. I don't think I can get to them being the second best team at Worlds. I think that's kind of just like overrating China as a whole.
Yep.
Which is tough for me to do. I'm historically, I think this is the first international that I'm higher on Korea than the market. But yeah, very strong team. I've never looked at the World Finals being in place A versus place B and how that impacts player performance, but I don't think it's the most outlandish idea. Like, obviously home court advantage exists in every sport, so maybe there is something to that.
Yep. On LNG, I think, historically I've been pretty low on Gala as well. I think it's not that I think he's bad. I think he's one of the most overrated players in the world. When he was on RNG, they would explicitly say that they were trying to give kills to Gala from like a theory perspective, because they think that giving the resources to the AD carry is the best thing to do. Let them get the gold, and then that turns into like the public saying, oh well, he gets more kills than everybody, he must be the best player on the team. He was never the best player on his own team, and he still isn't in my mind. I know that a lot of people have talked about Scout overperforming throughout the summer. I think going back to what you were saying about watching other content creators and listening to their opinion, what they do best is reinforce narratives that already exist, because they're easy things to talk about and vamp with. And that's where I think is the most value from an outsider's perspective, of kind of going against it or looking for a different reason to have the same opinion, or looking for a different reason to counter what they're saying. And I think that specifically with a team like LNG, Zika is a quality top laner. Tarzan's a very good jungler. He's been one of the best junglers in the world for several years. Scout is a great mid laner. Has been around forever. Gala, overrated, but can play his role. Like he's like an NFL team that can get to the 1 yard line, gives the ball to the running back, and he gets a rushing touchdown. And then everybody's like, oh, this guy has, it's like Jamal Williams. This guy has 14 to 16 rushing touchdowns last year. He's such a god. It's like, well, no, not really. He's just he's on a good team, and they put him in good game situation. That's how I kind of look at it. So personally, I think the most important player on this team is Tarzan, not because I think that he's much better than Scout, but because in order for them to reach their peak, he's going to have to make a difference that kind of matches the stability, the significance of the stability of Scout. Because if Scout is out there playing consistently in the early and mid game and is able to scale into the mid and late game team fights, Tarzan needs to bridge that gap in the early game to reinforce the stability that is in some ways one of their win conditions. Like if you keep the game close, they're good enough to win any team fight. So I think that's going to be pretty important when they're playing against the lower tiered teams. Consistency, that's where consistency is really the most important. By introducing volatility into the early and mid game, a lot of these teams can like really shoot themselves in the foot because it's not necessary to win the game. All right, so let's go to our first Korean team that we're going to talk about, Gen.G. And unsurprisingly, all of the players from Gen.G are in fact Korean. We have Doran, Peanut, Chovy, Pays, and Delight, but they also have another support who is probably going to be the starter. I forget what his name is. Actually, no, Delight's going to be the starter. Never mind. I was thinking about a different team. And he's been playing really well recently. I'll take this one first. So, did I say they're plus 550?
No, but they're plus 550.
So they're plus 550 on Bet365. They're 450 on Pinnacle, which is roughly 15.4%. I think that this is a team that will be overrated and overhyped going into Worlds because they are. Doran apparently has been playing much better this season compared to last year. He was looked at as a liability, and part of that has to do with the types of metas that have existed the past couple of years for carry top laners. If it's a carry top meta, Doran's not the top laner that you want. Can he function within that meta? Yes. Is he going to give your team like a huge winning edge compared to the other best top laners in the world? I don't think so personally. He's another player that kind of leans on stability and not requiring as much attention from the rest of their team. And that's a good situation to be in because you have Peanut, who is like a very intelligent jungler, has been one of the best junglers for a long time. And he is another player who enjoys getting resources, but can also play a more supportive style, which is going to, again, reduce volatility. I wouldn't be shocked if a lot of their games had lower kill scores because they were just looking to be as safe as possible, especially in the best of ones. Chovy, one of the best mid laners in the world, has almost become undervalued at this point because people think like, oh well, he's never won anything at the international level. He's never won Worlds, basically. He's never won Worlds, and he kind of shrinks in a lot of these situations. But for a while, it's been coaching. I think they put the team in bad spots by focusing on that the reduction of volatility, where skill expression looks better in like a higher kill environment. Pays is really the focal point of this team from the community perspective. He's a 17-year-old AD carry, came through their academy system. They feed him a ton of the resources. Delight is a good support that helps, make his life easy. This team is going to look like Pays is carrying them, but it really, in my mind, comes down to the strength of the rest of the players that are on the team, and Pays, in the worst case scenario, Pays can operate like somebody like Gala. The question is, can he, be the difference maker on his own? That's what we need to see, and I'm skeptical of that. I think that Chovy is still the most important player on this team and has the highest upside of this team. But they are a team that can win it all, for sure. So what do you think about Gen.G?
Yeah, I think this is the first time we're going to majorly disagree. I'm really high on Gen.G. Again, I didn't watch a single Gen.G game in spring or summer, so take that for what you will, but this team is just incredibly strong, from my opinion. I have no comments on like player takes, like Doran's going to be a liability type of stuff. He definitely has looked weak at past internationals, and in the LCK, he's kind of been, he's the guy that people have pointed to as the weak spot on this roster. Mm-hmm. But I don't really evaluate teams. I evaluate teams as a whole as opposed to the individual pieces. And they won both spring and summer, and they're a very Pays and Delight stepped into Ruler and Lehen's shoes and didn't miss a step. I obviously think that's kind of a factor of just having Chovy on your team. It's going to take a lot of pressure off of you as a rookie. And yeah, I guess they disappointed at MSI. They got 3-0'd, I think, by JG or BLG. I forget which one. And so I guess kind of what I'm hoping is that one, the Korean teams are on par with the Chinese teams, and this team swept finals and looked really strong doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you're going to sweep your region's finals, you're going to look like a really good team, and kind of any sort of like opponent adjusted metrics, right? And I guess the other hope is that Pays, as a rookie, gains some experience from MSI and has a higher ceiling than maybe he showed there, and has the same ceiling that he showed in LCK that he does on an international stage. But yeah, I guess just anytime you win the LCK, you're gonna. Anytime you sweep the finals as a team in the LCK, you're gonna grade out exceptionally strong. And anytime you win both spring and summer, it's just hard for me to get away from this team as being like overrated or something like that. I just view them as like an incredibly good team.
Yeah, and those are the first 3 teams that have very strong projected win rates in this type of environment. So let's put them into the tier list now. So where would you put Gen.G?
I would put them right up with JDG. I think that I think they're noticeably weaker. I would not say that they're going to be a favorite against JDG to win Worlds, but I would put them pretty close after JDG.
And you have them.
If that's a hot take. That's a hot take.
Sorry, you have them ahead of G2, right?
G2. Yes.
Okay, so right now we have G2 in the A tier. Are you putting Gen.G above them in the A tier or into the S tier?
I'd probably put them in the S tier, to be honest.
Okay. Next up, with LNG, where do you think LNG should be?
Yeah, so this is probably where I'm going to disagree. Is that I think LNG is actually weaker than Gen.G. Again, not by much. Like I certainly don't think that LNG is a bad team by any stretch, probably second or third best team at Worlds, but just slightly behind Gen.G. And so either back end of S or top end of A.
Okay, and you have them ahead of G2.
Yes, yeah.
So then I'll throw them right. Because I agree. I think that I prefer Gen.G to LNG. I'm not sure if I would have them both in the S tier. I would maybe have LNG in the A tier, closer to G2.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't like. I think we've kind of already pigeonholed ourselves by putting G2 in the A tier. Like JDG, I think is a cut above every team at Worlds, and I think Gen.G is kind of like not a distant second, but second.
Yeah, I also have an S plus tier. That's the thing. We will have one team in S plus, and it'll probably be JDG. So
yeah,
that's the distinction between S plus and S should probably happen in like at the end of the video or in like in a different video. But with JDG, we'll start off with having them in the S tier above Gen.G. And if we think there's a justification to move them higher, then cool. Because I guess the thing is we don't think it's 45%, but we don't think that they're 15% or 20% like Gen.G.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I would say before we move on to the next team is that before you said that this is one of the first times you've been higher on LCK going into a world championship, I'm historically on the LCK side. I think that the LPL is the one that always gets more hype, and the LCK is generally more consistent. Most of the best players from the LPL come from the LCK. So it's really about that. I think that's where the talent evaluation stuff is important to for me to fall back on, because I remember when they were in the LCK and they were already that good of a player. It's just now they're on a different team, whether or not their region is stronger or weaker, it's less clear. So let's move on. Let's go to the next team, BLG. Before the season started, I was very high on BLG. It was surprising how many people liked BLG before the season started. I think that for me at plus 800, it's borderline bettable. I really wish this was a scenario where if this was 2 or 3 years ago, they would not be plus 800. They'd be much, much lower than that, because these really aren't household names in the same way. Bin, everybody knows Bin at this point. He's performed well at Worlds in the past. Shun is a jungler that came over from Invictus Gaming. That was one of the edges that I thought that I would have for this team, is that once a player like Shun got to BLG, I would think that most people didn't know who he was, but they've already performed so well and they were already kind of hyped up when he got there. So he's another player that I really like. Yagao, it's really bizarre listening to the player take on Yagao because I think it's clear that he's not one of the best mid laners in the world. He's on a good team and the team is playing really well, but he is not the difference maker and he's really not the focal point of the team. And that's fine. Like, you can be a very good player in that type of role. Just you're not going to be an elite player in that role in my mind. Elk is an AD carry that I've loved for a long time, going back to World Elite when he was Jiaomeng. Great AD carry. He is one of the most underrated players probably at World still, even though his name is much more highly thought of at this point. I think that he really does have the potential to be a complete difference maker depending on what the meta looks like and how flashy he can be. I don't know if we'll leave this tournament thinking that he's the best AD carry in the world, but it's possible in my mind that happens because if BLG makes this deep run and he has these great score lines, people will start talking about him that way. And then On, another good player. On and Bin, I think, both coming from Suning in their past, where, again, I was high on Suning. They just didn't have the results to kind of back it up, and it never really materialized on Suning outside of the Worlds run for Bin, but On wasn't a part of that. And I think that Elk is the most important player on this team. I'll just throw them into the tier list right now. Personally, I like BLG. I would prefer to bet on BLG than LNG, for sure. I don't know if LNG. I don't know if I would take them to beat LNG head to head, but I think that the little bit of additional value makes me more likely to bet them. But even at plus 800, I'm not like running to the window trying to bet that number. So I would want to put them ahead of LNG in the tier list.
Yeah, I have them a little bit below LNG. Just the loss to them in playoffs. But again, I mean, just like incredibly strong team. Like they had either the best or second best regular season in LPL. Like, what a strong team. And, they losing LNG is not like a dark mark on them. Like, that's a really talented team, and it was 3-2, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, again, one of the best teams of Worlds. Love Elk. Big fan of Yagao, honestly. He's just a guy that just seems to get it done. Like, he's someone that does stuff that I'm not good enough at League of Legends to notice, but there's a reason he's always winning LPL. He's always got on the best team in the LPL or something like that. So, just a very quality roster. Going to be like, there's just no holes in this roster from what I understand. So, and guys that can kind of carry at every position. So, either high end of A tier for me, or I mean, I don't even know where else you'd put him, but that sounds about right.
I think that, like, just before we move on, like, just focusing in on the Yagao part again, I think that Yagao historically has been the beneficiary of having really good teams around him, specifically when he was with JDG. There were some times where, like, he was playing Zoe and was very impactful during the game, but Zoe's really not the same kind of win condition as, like, a true hyper carry mid laner that you would see somebody like Showmaker carry his face off in a game. Like, he's not going to pull out the Kassadin or something like that and make a game-changing play. It's more like playing control mages, doing his job, and that is something that should definitely be, like, applauded, because if you can't do that as a player, then that's a different way that teams can exploit you. So with Yagao, I think, definitely a very good player, does his job amazingly well. Just not I prefer carry players in general, which is not really as important from a betting perspective if his team continuously gets it done, which you're right, they do. So let's move on to another team from Korea. Some would say the team from Korea historically, and that's T1. So T1 is plus 900, plus 750 on Pinnacle. That's roughly 10%. Zeus, Owner, Faker, Gumayusi, and Keria. Faker is one of my favorite players of all time. Keria has quickly become one of my favorite players of all time. He is my favorite player at this point. I love Keria. I think that this year, Faker kind of had to step away for a little while because of medical stuff. Keria can't shine the same way when Faker isn't there, which maybe that's a mark against Keria. But T1 should have probably changed their playstyle to have Keria be more of a focal point, more impactful on the team as a whole. Last year, I think Zeus was overrated by the time that Worlds came. Not in the sense that he's not one of the best top laners in the world, but they were saying that he was the like by far the first or second best top laner in the world, which just was just not the case. Like there wasn't a huge distinction between him and a lot of the other top laners that were at Worlds, or a meaningful difference, not one that you can kind of exacerbate in game and create a huge advantage. Zeus, very good player still. Owner, I think, or Wunner, but when we look back at this team years from now, I'd be surprised if Wunner is thought of as like the one of the better players on the team. If they eventually moved on from him, I wouldn't be shocked. There are plays that I can instantly recall in memory, like him on Viego, where he looks like he's one of the best junglers in the world. But the lack of consistency, the lack of being able to do it when Faker's gone, I think should kind of kill off that narrative. That doesn't take anything away from T1 as a whole team, like a unit. Faker, one of the best players of all time. Gumayusi, again, was another player who got overhyped last year, but is still very good. And Keria, in my opinion, is one of the best players in the world. I think Keria is the most important player on this team. A lot of the other players get more of the notoriety because it's a flashier role that they play. But Keria will always be kind of an he'll be underappreciated, I think, just throughout his career until he goes to a different team. But I love T1 in this spot. I would prefer to bet on T1 than any of the teams that we've talked about so far. And if anything else happened in summer where Faker didn't have to step away for medical reasons, they would be plus 500, if not lower. And that's kind of why I am very close to putting in a bet on T1 at this point.
Yeah, T1 is the team that always fools me because their stats just never look that great, but they always win. And so it's this kind of question that not all stats are created equal. And T1 gets their kills, their towers, their gold when it counts. And a lot of that is Faker, and those stats are really fun to go over. As someone that does a lot of data stuff, to just see what the hell happened in the middle of the season where T1 is suddenly getting O2'd by the worst teams in the league. And then you make these opponent adjusted stats, and then Faker is just the highest rated player in the world because these guys look really bad without him, and then he comes back and they look really good. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a little too short for T1. Do I have them as winning 10% of the time? Not quite. I can't quite get there. But obviously, it's Faker at Worlds, so I mean, historically not a good proposition to bet against. So I will admit that I'm historically low on T1. I never quite get them right. I can never massage the numbers to make them a bet. I'm staying away. I'm not clicking the button this time, but I can totally see a world where people just didn't see that Faker stepped away, and that's why they looked so bad. But yeah, not for me, but I can totally get it.
Yeah, I think a good comparison, again, for people who might also watch the NFL, Faker on T1 is the same thing in my mind as Aaron Rodgers on the Jets. I think that while we don't know what the Jets would have been with Aaron Rodgers, you see what happens when he's not there. And it instantly dispels the notion that they're this amazing team once he's gone. Because without that focal point or the key component, it's tough to make the whole thing operate correctly. But we'll move on from T1, but before we do, just looking back at my preseason rankings, I had JDG as the number 1 team in the world. I had LNG as a top 20 team in the world, but not a team that I really expected to do as well as they have. I like the players, and that was also pre-Gala, but that is what it is. This was 7 or 8 months ago, so it's just kind of showing a lot of this stuff stays pretty static. Gen.G I had as the 7th best team in the world, BLG number 8, T1 number 3. And the number 4 team going into this year was Weibo. And they're currently plus 1,938 on Pinnacle, according to what I'm seeing. That's roughly 9.1%, so obviously very close to winning around the same amount that T1 is. They have The Shy, who is one of the best top laners in history, one of the most polarizing players in the world still. Weiwei, Xiaohu, Light, Crisp. I think that they are another team that I would love to put a bet in on. Xiaohu, RNG struggled a lot the past couple of years. Some of that was his fault, some of it wasn't. I think a lot of it had to do with misplaced blame because even in his rookie season, he was thought of as the next big thing, and that never really materialized. He is one of the best mid laners in the world. He's another person who can truly carry games. He can also play the control style. He can play top lane. He can kind of do it all. He's a very flexible player, and it really shows how versatile he is. I think that the Shy is the most important player for this team in this tournament specifically, because if he feeds, it's going to look horrible. If he ends up playing these carry versus carry matchups and their team does well, he is going to look like one of the best players in the world again. I don't think that I would bet it at plus 1,000, but I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't actively rooting for them.
Yeah, fun team. I get same thing. I don't get anywhere near plus 1,000 is fair. Just notably worse than the 3 teams above them, and to me also some of the Korean teams. So can't get there, but obviously replacing Carson with Weiwei seemed to be the answer.
Yep.
Everyone on this team is a veteran. You know what you're going to get, and you're going to get some guys with some really big ceilings. So. And some world championship winning upside, right? I think both the Shy and Crisp have won worlds. So.
Yep.
Good team. I would not. I mean, bet what you like. I can't get there on plus 1,000. If that's actually their current odds. So,
yeah,
not for me. But fun team, and yeah, obviously, I've always liked the. I think this is the old Suning organization. I've always liked that org. So,
yep.
Good luck to them.
Yep. So where do you have them relative to G2?
Still ahead of G2.
Okay. Next up, KT. KT is a team that I'm just not enthusiastic about. I understand that Keen has been highly thought of for a long time. They're plus 1,200, by the way, plus 1068 on Pinnacle. Keen's been highly thought of for a long time. Cuz, I think, is overrated at this point. I just will never think that he's an elite player. And when you come to an international tournament and you don't have an elite jungler, it's really tough to win. BDD has been highly thought of for a long time. No problems with him. More of a control player. Can he carry a game? Yes. Is he going to be the person that destroys you in a match against an elite player? Probably no. Aiming and Lehen's both very good players. I think Keen is the most important player because in order for KT to really be great this year, it will have to be in a meta that allows Keen to shine. I don't really expect that to be the case. I wouldn't bet this.
Yeah, again, this is team 2 that we're going to disagree on. I really like KT. I will say that like historically, no team has ever just like had like more loser DNA in their system than KT, right? Like they are just genetically disposed to losing and choking, and so I get it if people want to stay away. Like they've had super teams that have failed, they've had bad teams that have sucked. Like there's never been success for KT, especially on an international stage, right? So I get it, but like this team was really good in the regular season in summer. Each one of these players was like this roster was the first team all-star roster in LCK, and they then just like absolutely classic KT move. They pick T1 in playoffs and lose, and then they get T1 again and lose. So like I totally get why people are low on them. They just have that in them. Like that's the dog inside of them is the one that's going to lose to T1 after picking T1 as an opponent. But you can't tell me like you get the first team all-star LCK team and like this is going to be a team that's bad at Worlds.
Oh yeah, I don't think they'll be bad.
I'm much higher on market. Like Aiming and Lehens is like that's a sneaky, like I mean not even be sneaky, but that's a very talented bot lane duo.
For sure.
If I can get into the player takes realm for a little bit. And Keen apparently has looked like the best top laner in the world. We know how far that can actually take you in Worlds. You know, Ben made it to finals with Suning. Nuggery won with Dom won. I mean, the Shy with IG. You know, every year someone like that just pops off and makes a difference. So I'm big on KT. I totally get that they are just like everyone hates them and everyone's gonna be afraid to bet on them. I'm not happy that I clicked the button on them, but yeah, I definitely have a KT position. It's not fun, but I do have. I put real American dollars on KT to win Worlds. So
yeah, I think that
I hope they do it.
KT is less likely to fail during the Swiss format, but I think they're also less likely to actually win first place. Like I think that Weibo is more likely to fail in the Swiss format because I could see them in the best of ones, just drafting poorly, and maybe the Shy cost them a game or two. But yeah, I just don't believe in KT. The whole thing with picking T1 and then losing, that was one of the first matches that I watched in the past couple of months, which was just hilarious to me. But the last team from Korea, Damwon is my number 2 team from preseason. I absolutely love Damwon. Kana is a player that they're plus 1,400. Kana is a player that I absolutely love. When he was on T1, he was almost a focal point of T1 at that point because the meta suited him. Oh, sorry. The last thing I actually wanted to say was you were talking about top laners with Keen being thought of as one of the best top laners in the world right now and how they've done well in previous worlds. I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I think that the top laners that kind of not come out of nowhere, but pre-worlds, they're typically not thought of as elite top laners. And I think the reason why that's important is because that idea that you have an elite top laner and the other team doesn't is almost kind of like a trapdoor or like a rake, you know what I mean? Where like you step on the rake, you hit yourself in the face. Because if you go up against Suning and you're like, they have Bin's a good top laner, but he's not elite. The Shy, he's a good top laner, but they're from China. Like this was before China was really thought of as a great place in terms of League of Legends. And, he kind of proved everybody wrong and showed that a carry top laner really can be this huge difference maker at Worlds. And then even with last year, Kingen wasn't thought of as highly as Bin or 369, but, he ended up not proving everybody wrong, or Zeus, but he ended up showing out on the biggest stage possible. Where maybe that's an edge, maybe when you see like, this top laner is actually really good, is kind of undervalued. I think that's a better, maybe more actionable piece of information as opposed to Keen, who's already thought of as a great top laner, but we haven't seen it on the international stage. But I don't know how much water that's really going to hold. But maybe Kana fits that profile because he has had really good international performances before. But he just wasn't able to kind of carry Nongshim last year. Canyon, one of the best junglers in the world. Showmaker, one of the best mid laners in the world. Deft, one of the best AD carries of all time. Kellen, serviceable support player, arguably a very good support player. I think that Canyon is the most important player on this team. I know that Showmaker generally gets more attention as the heart and soul of this team, but I think that Canyon or Kana will be the player that determines whether or not Damwon can win it all. Damwon is probably my favorite bet. I do like the fact that they have the longest odds. I get a little bit more value for my money, and I think that right now they're underappreciated because a lot of the narratives surrounding Damwon are like, they had a huge slump. Will Kana choke again? Is he as good as everybody thinks that he is? Showmaker, there's something that Kadril was playing, like, Showmaker was upset with certain matchups in mid lane and felt like he was at a disadvantage. All of those things are depressing this number, probably. So I like that. I want to bet on that kind of team. My only concern is Deft. Like, I know that Deft is one of the best players of all time, but, I was skeptical that it was going to work out last year, so that's where I'm at with Damwon. I would probably place them above BLG. I think I'd probably that's the question mark. Definitely ahead of LNG for me, and then KT. I probably have them after G2. But that's neither here nor there. So let's see what do you think about Damwon? Is this another one we disagree on?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, but not really. Like, this team on paper looks insane. I think all 5 of these players, especially Canyon, Showmaker, Deft, have at their peaks been the best players in their role, right? So I'm not saying it. They definitely have a ceiling outcome, in their distribution of outcomes. But there's this classic line in Moneyball where it's like, this guy's a good hitter, then why doesn't he hit good? It's like, these guys are good players, why don't they play good? And it's just hard to get over. Like, the game is played on the computer, but like you can kind of take the stats and see like these guys are just not like they are just really struggling to hit what they should be hitting, and they just did not look great either split. Like there's really no way to like massage the data to like make them look like they played well, but obviously Worlds you get a few games, and if you can hit your peak during a few games, then you can win Worlds. And this is a team that has that peak to do it. So I personally would not. I can't get the numbers to make it plus EV at plus 1400, but and I had them as the weakest team from the East. But there's clearly like a ceiling here that they can hit. That it's definitely possible. Like I would not wake up and be like surprised that like, yep, Showmaker won Worlds, Canyon won Worlds, Deft won Worlds, like that. We've seen it before, so I wouldn't be surprised it happens again.
Yeah, this is the type of team where I mentioned before the wildcard stuff is so important to me. Watching that, I will figure out what meta we're in and what types of champions are going to be strong, and that will determine whether or not I fire at Damwon, because that'll tell me like what avenues to winning do they really have, and then like comparing their roster to other teams. Like, do I think Canyon can actually make that big of a difference in most of the games as opposed to some of the games? Like, what do the top champion pools look like? What is Showmaker going to be allowed to like counter? So all those things will be more clear after the WQS, and then also the play-in stage. So you'll probably want to. I would probably want to hit this number right after the NA LEC stuff. But that's basically it. So, was there anything else that you wanted to say before we get out of here?
No, again, just if you have, these are probably the teams that people know the most about, just because these are the biggest leagues in the world. So if you do have takes or info that you think the market doesn't know, this is probably the chance that you have to make the most EV. But yeah, again, good luck. I hope Gen.G or KT wins Worlds. But yeah, best of luck to anybody betting on Worlds. Have fun.
Word. All right. Well, we'll probably hit you guys with another video relatively soon. This one should come out tonight. But that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.